Welcome to Chapter and Verse. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with international best-selling authors Brian Andrews and Jeff Wilson, with stories behind their careers, their books, their best-selling military series, Tier 1, and other books of theirs, and advice and tips they have for writers and on writing. And be sure to stay around to the end because they'll be giving their top #1 tip. I'm Rick Bleiweiss. I am an award-winning author, and I have a historical fiction mystery book coming out next February called 𝐵𝐼𝐿, Scorpion and the Barbershop Detectives. That's enough about me. Hi, Brian. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Rick.
Hey,
Rick. How are you?
Hey,
good to see you.
Good to see you. So let's start with, you're both military men. So how did you meet, and what are some stories behind your military careers?
Sure. So, Brian and I we definitely met and became friends because of this tie to the military. Although we did not know each other in the military, we served in very different communities and most of my service was at a different time. There was a little bit of overlap, but I'll let Brian tell you about his service. But my service is as eclectic as the rest of my life. So I started out in aviation, did that for a very short period of time before a motorcycle accident ended that for me. And then I flew civilian aircraft for a time and joined another part of the federal government. We'll leave it at that, and served in that capacity for a while. And that was a rather violent lifestyle. As a young man, it was, it wasn't like on TV. It wasn't all I thought. And I decided to go in a completely different direction and pursue a career in medicine. And then, long story short, years later, I was still a naval reservist because I've always had this need to serve. And when the terrorists attacked the towers and the Pentagon and other places, it just upset me, and like it did so many Americans, and I went back in. So the vast majority of my service was after that. After 9/11, I went back in the Navy. I served as a combat surgeon with the Marines first, and then later joined special warfare and made multiple deployments with a SEAL team. So that's sort of my military story. And then Brian, you were in the military, right?
Yes, I remember it. So I'm pretty sure it happened.
We've been telling people for a long time. So
right now, I didn't have my beard in the military, but I was in the military. Now we did have something called the no shave chit. So you could donate money. You could buy this little chit that you could carry around in your uniform when you're underway and nobody's going to see you. You weren't going to be wandering around base or anything like that. You could grow your submarine beard. Now, operators like what Jeff used to serve with, they just grow their beards because,
Okay.
We had actually pay for it. So we would pay, I don't remember what it was, like $50 or something like that. And then you could not shave. And then that money would go to the ship's MWR fund so that they could have a big barbecue or party or something like that. But it wasn't all fun and games underway in the submarine force. It wasn't, I swear. So, but yeah, I also am a Navy veteran. I was a submarine officer on a fast attack submarine. I operated in the Pacific Theater and did all sorts of really cool stuff, sort of that Red October, Hunt for Red October stuff. We did a lot of that stuff. And in addition to that, we did coastal surveillance and battle group escort, and we launched Tomahawks and some stuff like that. Submarine versus submarine exercises, that was fun. But I served before 9/11. So I got out actually before 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I was in business school, which was sort of starting the next phase of my post-military career in life. And I was a Park Fellowship leader. It's a fellowship really around leadership, focused on servant leadership, how to grow a business, but also how to lead. And that was very valuable. Did some entrepreneurial things, but always writing was sort of something I was interested in. I was always working on a book, sort of in the background. It took me a very long time to write that first book, a ridiculous amount of time, like 6 or 7 years. But when I finally got it done, I was like, what do I do with this book? So I said, I should probably talk to some other authors, find out what thriller writers do. And got some coaching and heard from folks said, you really should go to Thriller Fest. There's this great conference in New York City called Thriller Fest, where all the thriller writers for the whole world sort of meet up. And people were very friendly and very helpful. and they'll put you through the paces there and help make connections and stuff. And that's where I met Jeff, was at Thriller Fest.
That's right.
How did that happen? Did you just run into each other, or did you
Oh, no.
There was first of all, I'm going to show you.
I thought it's my turn to keep talking.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No, I get in trouble, Rick. I'm really sort of the abused partner. No, so it's kind of a funny story because I was a little bit like a stalker. So I don't really do social things very well. I mean, I do them well. I just don't enjoy them. I'm not comfortable. And so it was my very first Thriller Fest. Like it was, you had been before though, right? You had been the year before.
I think I'd been the year before.
Yeah, but it was my first time, and we were debut authors. So they have a lot of special events for, people who have their debut novel out that year. So we were both in this panel together. But the night before, there's a cocktail reception. And so Wendy, my wife, and I are there, and I'm sitting in the hotel room and I'm going through the catalog, looking for people that are also military like me, thinking, okay, well, these would be the people I could actually talk to. I'll have something in common with them. And I'm like taking little mental snapshots of their faces in the hope that I can track some of them down. And so it's really kind of a pathetic story as I say it out loud. But so we're at this cocktail party and I'm with my beautiful wife and we're not really talking to anybody. And I see this guy sitting at a table, and it has to be the Brian Andrews guy whose face I memorized because he's by himself, like a submariner would be. And he has a little tear.
He's crying.
Little tear. So no, I mean, he was sitting there. He probably had been the life of the party, but I walked over and introduced myself, and we actually formed an instant friendship, not just because we were Navy veterans. That was certainly part of it, and not just because we were in the same debut author class, but we just had the same life. We were, family people. We were passionate about our children. Our daughters were the same age. And, we were talking about our wives, and we just formed a fast friendship right then and there. No thought whatsoever of co-authoring or anything like that. That came later, but we definitely connected at Thriller Fest. So if you're a writer out there listening to this and you want to know how networking works, you got to come to Thriller Fest for sure. It's where I met Brian. It's where I met my agent, who's now our agent. It's where we've met our entire network of fellow authors that support one another. So I'm glad Brian brought that up because it really was the key, I think, to our careers.
Cool. So how and when did you make the leap from friends to co-authors?
Yeah, so we had that first Thriller Fest fun. And like Jeff said, we were debut authors, and that was our first book. The organization is very good with new authors to try to help them promote their work. And so Jeff and I were like, this is a great conference. We're going to go back. So we went back the next year, hung out, swapped stories. And I think it was 2 years later, maybe after our debut class, that we said, sort of asked him, what are you working on? And he said, well, he had finished his third book and was thinking about his fourth. And I just finished writing my second, was thinking about my third. So luckily we didn't have anything like under contract or that we were working on particularly, because it allowed me to say, what if, with my submarine background and your special warfare background, what if we did like a SEALs and subs sort of thing? That could be really cool. He's like, yeah, maybe that could be cool. He's like, how would that work? And I said, oh, I don't know exactly, but we could collaborate on. He's like, I don't know, like co-authoring, like seems like that'd be hard to do. I'm pretty used to, I get in my zone and I write, like, I'm not sure how I would share the page, how would we do that? And I said, I don't know, but why don't we draft something up and give it a try? He was pretty reluctant. I had to bulldog him really into this idea. I kind of tricked him a little bit, actually.
Oh, he totally tricked me. Let's see if you'll be honest with that part of the story.
Yeah. Well, what I did is I used my psychology degree to. I said, how about this? What if we write 5 chapters, and if it doesn't work, then you can keep the book. No harm, no foul. Your story, take it and run with it. But if it does work, it is working, then we'll continue on it together. And I think in his mind, he's thinking, what? This is a great deal for me because I'm having fun on these draft chapters, and we've done some great brainstorming, and it seemed like a really cool idea. This was tier 1, actually. So this is the genesis of our big storytelling careers, tier 1. So there's a lot of good meat and potato type of concepts in the book. And you know, when we started, we kind of started outlining a few things, and then we just jumped into it, and it was fun. Like from the get-go, we were having fun.
For sure, it was. That's the key. It was a lot of fun. I really was reluctant, and although I do suspect, if he were really honest, there was a lot of groundwork he laid up into. It wasn't like in the moment he came up with this idea. We've been brainstorming the story, because I did, you know, what I did tell him no. I mean, he's being kind. I flat out said, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I just don't see.
Yeah.
I don't see how that works. I had been writing short stories since I was 12. Like I just didn't imagine that it could work. And so I did say no. I said no a second time because he asked again. But both times I was like, but I'll help you. Like, we're friends. Like, if you need some insight into the NSW community. And so we brainstormed it together. And the story, you know, a lot of people that are watching have read the book now, but the story got really good. And I was getting really excited about it. And I know he knew that. But he's right when he said, look, you know, we'll write 5 chapters, and then if it doesn't work out, you'll get. I did have in my mind, wow, I'm going to feel a little guilty, but I just got a great book from this brainstorm. But we started writing, and he had said, we'll write 5 chapters, and then we'll see. We'll talk about it. And I don't think did we ever even talk about, I don't think we ever brought it up again. We wrote those 5 chapters, and we just kept going. Nobody ever talked about it again until people started asking us about it. And we wrote that first draft. You know, it was a rough draft, but we wrote that first draft in, it's like 16 weeks, 15 weeks, like crazy, like crazy efficient. And it was fun. Brian's right. There was, you know, you're a writer, Rick, so you know, writing is a joy, but it's also a slog. Like, it's lonely, and, you know, you write this genius thing and there's no one to tell about it. Your wife says, oh, it looks good to me, but she doesn't have any context. But it really is fun to collaborate. And then there's no such thing as writer's block, because these are phone call away. And so I can't even at this point, honestly, being the reluctant partner, I can't even imagine going back to, I mean, I perhaps one day we'll do some separate projects. And we've done a little bit of that over the last few years, but it's just such a joy to write together. I don't know why I would do that to myself now.
So how do you break up who's going to write what? Do you divide it by chapter, by character, by, you're obviously not both writing the same thing and picking which one's better, I'm assuming.
We've heard some funny stories from other co-authors about, oh, we get on the phone and, you know, I'm typing and they're talking, and, you know, that's not how we do it at all. What we do is, Rick, you know our books because we're with Blackstone,
right?
And Sons of Valor follows the same sort of model that all of our stories do. So we write third person, multi-point of view.
Right.
And that is great for co-authoring because it lends itself to dividing up the chapters based on the different characters. Now, some people think that Jeff writes all Dempsey and I might write all Grimes or whoever, but it doesn't work that way. That wouldn't be fair, and it really wouldn't be fun. So what we do is we make sure that everybody gets to spend a little time in the different characters' heads. And what we found by doing it that way, instead of it feeling, you would think that there'd be this really rough transition between a chapter that Jeff wrote and one that I wrote. You'd be like, oh, well, that doesn't feel like the same character. And the way that we sort of get around that, or the way that this has evolved, it maybe wasn't a plan originally, but I have to give Jeff credit for this idea. Like, when we started on tier 1, he said, we need to take our ego out of the equation so that we're not like, you know, turf guarding this sentence. Oh, well, I'm going to protect this sentence and this idea was mine. And I want to make sure this happens here. That from the beginning, that wasn't our approach. Our approach was, hey, let's brainstorm a cool scene. We'll sort of figure out how we think we want it to go. And then we'll write a rough draft. But then if I wrote that draft chapter, he can change anything he wants in it and vice versa. And what happens is we're always changing. We're always calling the other guy and saying, okay, you wrote this. Is it okay if I change this or do this? And we're at the point now where we really don't need permission. We just sort of say, we trust each other. So it's all based on trust. And that's our secret sauce, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. But in addition to making it more fun, because, nobody wants to not get to write Dempsey or not get to write Chunk because they have to write the other guy. So it is more fun, but it also is an important part of the formula. One of the greatest compliments that we sometimes get is when someone says, it was hard for me to believe there were two writers.
Yeah.
Because it just feels like one voice. And we consider that an enormous compliment, obviously. But I think that what Brian's talking about, that technique of, both of us, I write Dempsey in part 1 and maybe he writes them in part 2. That's part of it. But the other part of it is every time we write a few chapters, we swap them. And so if we're in part 1 and I'm writing Dempsey and Jarvis and et cetera, then every few days we swap the chapters and I rewrite everything that he did and he rewrites everything I did. It's a little bit of developmental editing, but it's also just smoothing out the voice a little bit so that by the end, it does have that single voice feel that's important to us. But it has evolved now. And people always think that we make this up, even my wife. But my wife will come to me and she'll say, oh, yeah, in that book, chapter 17, I could tell that was you. You wrote that, right? And I don't know. And I know that sounds, there's things I know that I wrote first or he wrote first. But it is very common for me to be like, I'm really not sure. Maybe Brian did. In fact, I've been on the phone with Brian because of course we talk 4 or 5 times a day when we're in the middle of a project. And I'll be like, yeah, so that thing that you wrote in chapter 11, I really, really like that. Man, that was really good. I want to make this one change. And he's like, change whatever you want. You wrote that. I'm like, I wrote that. He's like, I think so. I think you wrote that. So it really, over time, it has evolved into this, we talk a lot about, putting team and mission before self, in our personal lives, our professional lives, business. But in the creative writing part, it has become so real now that it really just feels like Brian and I are writing a book. It doesn't feel like I'm writing and Brian's writing and somehow we have to meld it together. So that's, I think, what makes it so much fun.
Cool. So now when you start on a new book, do you outline it? In other words, do you know where it's going, or does it just kind of flow as it comes into your heads, or do you plot it out and what is the process you use?
So both and neither, which sounds like a terrible answer. But so one thing about the way we write is both of us write best when we write individually. We're both that style of writer that we sort of arc out a general story, but it is so much A, more enjoyable, but B, the story is better if, as weird as it sounds, we let the characters tell the story a little bit. As the characters become real to you, and Rick, I know you can, having read some of your stuff and how rich your characters are, you know what I'm talking about. Those characters, as they become real, they sort of drive the narrative a little bit. And so because we write that way individually, doing a lot of outlining really is inhibiting for us. So we're not big outliners, but what we do is we arc the basic story out, starting with that what if question that we always talk about, what if, like in Sons of Valor, what if the terrorists got new technology and changed the asymmetry of warfare, and then we go from there. But once we get a general idea, we really do start writing and let it sort of inform. Now, obviously that's hard when you have 2 people writing because you got to be on the same page. And that's why we talk constantly, several times a day. We have a rough outline. So it might be like there's 7 chapters on a piece of paper and chapter 6 says Brian, POV, Chunk, and there's like 1 sentence to remind us sort of what we're supposed to write there, but it's all really been discussed ahead of time.
And we write in the 3-act structure. So that's because all of our books follow 3-act structure. That's great for us. And when we start on tier 1 or outline, we did start with outlining, and it really evolved to what Jeff's talking about because our brains sort of naturally think this way of, okay, let's think about act 1. Okay, like he said, we've got our what if question, the inciting event, and we will maybe map out the first 5 to 10 chapters. But then, like Jeff said, it's very important to let your characters sort of drive the narrative because your villain is doing something, right? He's 1 step ahead of the hero. And then it's thrust and parry, then the hero responds and the villain responds. And we can only map out so many of those. In fact, a lot of your good ideas don't happen until, the first idea is already on the page. There has to be something there, some momentum, I think, to trigger the creative part of your brain or the plotting part of your brain to think, oh, you know what would make this better? You know what would make it worse for the good guys is if the bad guys did this. And we actually had, we're working on a book today. We're mapping out part 3, act 3, which is the climax and resolution. We sort of had a general idea what we thought was going to happen. And so during this call, we sort of said, okay, well, here's what we sort of talked about. How can we make this, how can we put a twist in there, you know, for the reader?
Yep.
How can we make it more thrilling, more exciting, more stressful? And Jeff was like, oh, okay, let's go back into part 2. There was a chapter that we wrote. He's like, we're gonna take out all the clues for what we sort of telegraphed would happen. And now when we get to the end, the reader's gonna have no idea, you know, what the bad guy's gonna do. And so we're all excited. You can tell we're excited. We're starting on this climax. And that's probably the most exciting part of every story too, is how it winds down. So
it's kind of interesting because what you described is the exact opposite of what I have to go through, because I have to make sure I'm planting clues in a mystery so that at the end, the reader doesn't go, how in the heck was I supposed to know that?
Now, Rich,
true.
But do you find, like, because this happens to us a lot, do you find that sometimes because the story evolved, you're like, I need to go back into chapter 4 and plant the seed? Right. Yeah, we do that. We do that a lot.
Yeah.
Didn't know that was going to happen. So it was hard to foreshadow something we didn't know about. But the other thing that's really fun, and I know this has happened to you probably, that rare moment where you're like, oh my gosh, let's do this. And you go back to put it and you're like, I already put it. How did I know? How did I? And so did the idea come from what you planted subconsciously, or are you just a genius, an evil genius of some sort? I love that when that happens.
That's cool. So are any of your characters based on people you knew or were worked with, or are they just totally figments of your imagination?
I mean, I think they're all grounded in people that we know. There's elements of men and women that we served with because we're military thriller writers, and this is a big part of our ethos. You know, it'd be impossible for us not to have elements of different people that we know. There's little anecdotal stories that maybe, you know, we took this piece from over here and this piece from over here, and now they come together.
Right.
So I think there is, and I think that that's important for us to answer this question, because we want to make sure that everybody knows that there's some amazing, amazing, amazing people out there serving, protecting our nation. They're on the front line. They're putting their lives at risk. And so this is one way that we sort of pay homage to them and honor their service and their sacrifices by putting them on the page.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, I think that, you know, taking this story and that story is part of it, but some of our characters are actually even amalgams of like 2 or 3 important people. I mean, when I think about Dempsey, Brian, there's like, we can both think of a couple of people like, yeah, there's different parts. There's not very many characters that it's that dude. There's one exception to that. First of all, we have borrowed some names, and I will not tell you which names, of course, but there have been some names where, you know, a friend that we've served with, and we say, hey, how about if we name this character after you? But the one exception is there, Dan Munn is definitely modeled after a dude that's Dan. Like, I mean, he's no longer in the military, so I think it's okay to say. But Dan is still a very close friend. Brian has not actually met him in person yet, but Dan is a lot like Dan. But I think other than that, they're mostly amalgam is the best word. They're an amalgam of people. But like Brian said, that's part of our desire and something we stated at the beginning of our partnership to one another. We want to honor people through this fiction. We want these characters to be honorably represented, but also to show the real lives of what these people are like. Not the stories. It's an action thriller, right? Of course, but
right.
we want to represent these people the way we know they are, the honorable people that they are, and the incredible things that they do.
Great. I want to go back to something you had referenced earlier when you said you were at Thriller Fest and you met your agent there. So it was Gina, and was Gina both of your agents, or did one of you meet her and then the other one decided to go with her? Did you have separate agents at the time? And how did you meet her and get her to be interested in representing you?
Well, I was represented by Gina when I met Brian. Brian was represented by somebody else at the time. I did meet her there. It wasn't a pitch fest thing, but I did meet her there, and I pitched a story to her. In funny side note, of all the books that we've published now individually and together, we're coming up on 24 here. The only book that has either of us has written that we haven't sold is the book that I signed with Gina for. So, but I was.
And I told him he shouldn't sell it because we don't want to jinx anything.
That's right.
And maybe it ruins our reputation at this point. That's what you're really worried about. It's like,
no.
Hey, it's not that good.
You'd have to send it to me first for a quick pass.
Of course, like I do all of my personal. But anyway, so Gina was representing me, and then, it wasn't that there was one agent better than another agent. It was just this was a good fit because of the connections for this particular product she already had, and she was Gina now. She's incredible. So she wound up representing both of us after Tier 1.
It was sort of a funny story for me because I got my agent at Thriller Fest during Pitch Fest. So for those of you who are listening, who are aspiring authors who have not been to Thriller Fest, it's maybe the best way in the universe to get a literary agent. And that's because they have something called Pitch Fest, where they have probably 30 agents in a ballroom at tables, and it's like speed dating. You get 3 minutes with the agent to pitch yourself and pitch your book. And these are busy people, and they all have query piles, slush piles in their inbox, on their desk, that are a mile long. And to actually get their attention, undivided attention for 3 minutes, that's like gold. And so I got my first agent there, and she was near retirement age. And I remember asking her, I said, now I'm going to leave out names. And I remember asking her, I said, now you're not, after she gave me the offer, I said, you're not going to go and retire on me. So you're not going to sell this book and like next year call me up and say I'm retiring. She's like, oh no, I plan to do this for many, many years. Okay. So she sells my first book. And I was literally 3 months later, she's like, I know I told you that I wasn't going to retire, but I'm retiring. So yeah, that kind of forced my hand. And luckily enough, because Jeff was working with Gina, actually I got a second agent, but she was very busy, and it just sort of worked out. I wasn't with her very long. So Gina, I met Gina, and she is badass. She's amazing. So she was lucky enough to extend me and offer representation too, and we never looked back since then. So
neither of you ever had to write a query letter, it sounds like.
No, other than to agents, because I had queried agents I was querying agents when I met Gina. The first books I did were without an agent, and so I was sort of in that process when I met Gina. So I have had to write that agent query, but not very many times, thank goodness. You hear stories of people that had to write 100 of these things until they found that right match, and then things went well for them. So.
yeah, and I blind queried, and it was a nightmare. And that was one of the reasons I went to Pitch Fest. So I said, this is not an efficient way to get an agent, mailing a letter and waiting 4 months every single shot. I said, I'll be in the grave before I get an agent at this rate. So that's why, Pitch Fest is so amazing.
Cool. So Tier 1, that was, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, your breakthrough series. And I'm assuming at some point after you wrote it and it got published, you went, wow, we've got a hit on our hands. When did that happen?
You want to take this one? You want me to?
Either one, because I'm not sure I know when it happened. I know that we went into the launch feeling pretty good because the pre-sales were really, really good. And so you sort of know, but I don't think it's a funny thing, the breakthrough hit book that makes you a success. I think that there's at least for us, I think, because we've talked about this before, there's kind of a lag between when you're successful and when you realize you are. I think for us, that was like maybe last time when we came to Oregon. Like it's like we have all these books and they've all done really well, and we interact with our fans, and then every now and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I actually like we're doing pretty well. I feel like I maybe not even quite there yet. But Brian, weren't we just talking about that like a few weeks ago?
Yeah, and I don't know how to explain this. I think, you know, there are certain authors that have the big book of the summer. There's a couple big books a year that sell millions of copies, and it's their first book. And those stories get a lot of press, a lot of publicity. And, you know, we always say, you know, in some sense, we're glad that wasn't us, because like, what a big expectation. And I remember listening to Gillian Flynn talk about, you know, Gone Girl, and she was saying, you know, on the one hand, I almost wish it never happened, you know, but on the other hand, you know, of course it was the best thing that ever happened. But
Right.
you know, it's like you at some point know that maybe no matter what you do, even if it's the best book you ever write, maybe the stars will never align again like that. So you could have that uber level of success. And I think maybe for both of our personalities, like the universe has been nice, you know, been thoughtful for us, because, you know, if that had happened, maybe we wouldn't have been driving so hard. Maybe we wouldn't have invested so much in the series. Maybe we would have, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have turned out like this, but I'm glad it didn't. You know, Tier 1 was enough of a success, a big enough success that it put us on the map, and it allowed us to get respect and a fan base. But we're still driving. We still want to tell lots of stories, and we're still motivated and chomping at that bit. And so I think for us, it worked out. It was the right amount of success at the right time.
Right. Do you have any opinions on self-publishing versus being published through a publisher, a traditional publisher?
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I think we try to use what we call a hybrid model. Wouldn't you say, Jeff? I mean,
Yeah. I think it's really about diversification, right?
yeah. I mean, it's a slog. No, not a slog. It's a challenge, no matter which way you want to go. I remember when I started writing, and I, again, looking for my first agent, read some articles. You know, they said it's harder to get your book published by one of the big 5 publishers than it is to get into Harvard. Your chances of getting published are less than getting into Harvard. That's how selective that vetting process was. Because, you know, 90% of the submissions are never represented by agents. They call 90% of those. And then the acquiring editors only take 10% of the ones that the agents are shopping. So there's real attrition. And then by the time they do get published, you know, only a small fraction of those actually get marketing and publicity. So discovery, awareness, those things are a big challenge. And then along comes Amazon with KDP, and suddenly it's like, hey, everybody can be an author. Woohoo! And that is great because everybody can be an author, but it's also not great because everybody can be an author. So if I circle back to the Harvard metaphor, you say, well, what if Harvard was like, guess what? Everybody can come to Harvard regardless of your skill and education level. You can all be students here. It would have a dilutive effect, right? It would not be the same experience because you'd have some people that didn't learn the craft and didn't pay their dues, and they're just maybe not professionally, emotionally, or ready to be in the A game, right? Same with Major League Baseball. What if you just said anybody off the street can show up and put on a Cubs hat and get up to bat? So that's a little bit what's happened with, you know, self-publishing in the beginning. Now the stars and the cream rises to the top, and there's some amazing self-published authors who have their entire act together. But now, you know, it's competition to get to that point.
I think the only thing I would add, I agree with all of that. I think the only thing I would add for if there's writers that are listening to this that are, you know, early in their career and they're trying to make that decision, what's best suited for me? Because I do think there's a role for both. And I do think that there are people that are individually suited for one versus the other. I think that it's important that the young writer understand if you want to go the self-published route, there is nothing wrong with that. There are some, you know, Jason Casper, well, Tim Tigner, you could run the list, but you know who the names are. But these guys are hugely successful. They're making a good living, but they work like animals, and they work not just at the writing. So you need to ask yourself up front, am I going to enjoy cover design? Am I going to enjoy hiring editors and formatting my book and doing all of these things that the publisher, the big publisher, does for you, yes, you're going to get, a lot higher royalty rate per book, but you're also going to have a huge expense. You're doing your own marketing. You're doing your own publicity. You have to do all of that on your own. And if you enjoy that and you think you can be good at it, you talk to a guy like Jason or you talk to Andy, they love that part of it. And that's why they're successful. They're successful because they really do enjoy all of it. If you're not someone that enjoys all of it and what you really want to do is tell stories, I would tell you, you're probably making a mistake if you try to go the independent route. So there's good and bad to both. I think for Brian and I, we're in the traditional model. We have dabbled a little bit with some independent publishing, and I'm glad that we do that because I do think being diversified, you bring in people from different spaces and that grows your brand. But for us, especially the pace we're writing now, as you know, Rick, like several books a year, I just don't think we could possibly do a good job because we don't have the time and the attention. Now we have the money, we just don't have the time to invest in all of that other stuff. But I think there's some amazing independent writers out there for sure.
Well, I agree. And the independent self-published writers that I know who are successful have done exactly what you've said. And they've done advertising and marketing and, everything a publisher would do, but they did it themselves. And unfortunately, on social media, I connect with a lot of aspiring writers who seem to be of the opinion that their job is to write the book, and whether they're traditionally published or not, it's not their responsibility to do all the marketing and advertising. And I keep telling them, I don't care whether you're traditionally published or self-published, you guys are a prime example of this, need to do marketing because the sum of the parts, creates the bigger whole. Talk about some of the marketing you're doing. I mean, you're doing some really creative marketing.
I mean, I think that's smart, what you just said. I'm going to let Brian tell you what we're doing, but I think that that's really important that writers understand that the day of when Robert Ludlum just turned in his manuscript and then no one saw him until he turned in his next manuscript, that's not the world we live in. And it's not because the publishers don't want to help you. It's because the universe is different. There's social media, there's podcasters, there's all these other things out there that the publisher just simply doesn't have the bandwidth to do without your help and your connections. And so I think that's a really good point that you make. You're not giving up all necessity to market yourself. And I'll let Brian tell a little bit about some of the creative things that we've come up with. But I'm glad you made that point for the young writers that are listening.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I think, I'll talk about our platform in just a second, but when you were talking, Jeff, it made me just think that, the most successful organizations, businesses, are where every single person realizes I'm a salesman or a saleswoman for the company, and if let's say you're an engineering firm and you have somebody on site and they're doing work, it's not just the sales guy who comes up with this proposal and takes the client out to lunch to win the deal. In fact, the experts, the people who are customer facing, they do a lot for selling their product or their service to a business. And I learned that, when I was doing entrepreneurial stuff, is like, what? I hate the sales stuff, but I have to be a salesman. Even if I think I'm the boss of the company, my first job is to sell. And so really it's the same as a writer. You need to be out there engaging people, selling yourself, selling your product, which is your book, selling your ideas. And I don't mean it in a cheap or sleazy way, like a used car salesman. I mean that you're out there because you're passionate about what you're doing, right? And you want to tell people about it. And so for us, our platform is veteran awareness, veteran cooperation. We realize as veterans, when you get out of the military, it is very, very competitive. The business world is different. The norms are different. You don't have a rank. You don't have a mission. You're sort of trying to figure it all by yourself. And so what we realize is our partnership is an example we try to live. This isn't just lip service. We do what we say. We came together and we collaborate and we work together as a team. And we feel like we've brought that same mentality to our platform. So, you look behind me, we've got this Bone Frog coffee here. This
Cool.
is a great company. It's a veteran-owned business. Tim _𝐿, former Navy SEAL. And Jeff reached out to Tim and said, I love what you're doing. Your coffee is delicious. How can we help? And he said, you could talk about it. You could put it on social media. And we were like, you know what? We'll do one better. We'll put it in one of our books. And he's like, you know what? Why don't we make a coffee after Sons of Valor? So here we go. The Sons of Valor branded coffee.
Very cool.
This helps both of us. This is a force multiplier. It gets our message out there that coffee drinkers that wouldn't have heard about us find out about our book, and readers who drink coffee that don't know about Bone Frog Coffee find out about it that way. So this is one of the ways that we've tackled as we realize, you know what, like Jeff said, we only have so much time and so much bandwidth. But if we have a nice community of people, we're all supporting each other, then you really get this nice force multiplier effect.
Cool. So talk about some of the projects you're working on, Sandbox and the Web Griffin and a few of the others. I mean, you guys are busy and spread out a lot. And of course, we're very glad to have you at Blackstone, but I think everybody'd love to hear about what you've got on the horizon.
Mm.
Sure. So obviously Sons of Valor, the first book in the Sons of Valor series came out in June, and we've just been super excited about the response to that book, a shared universe book with the Tier 1 series. And I think that's done well, and it's going to continue to do well. So we'll have those books coming out, once a year. We have a new series launching actually in just a few weeks, September 7th, from Tyndale House. So it's a little bit of a change for us. This is it's a change, but not. It's an action thriller, exciting Navy SEAL type book. But this one has a faith element that's pulled through it, dealing with spiritual warfare and crisis and faith. And so we were able to add these other elements into a faith-based story that has all those Andrews and Wilson high stake things. That the faith-based Christian fiction is changing a lot, as you well know. They're becoming a lot more mainstream and realizing that just because you go to church doesn't mean you don't go see the next Bourne movie, right? And so let's find some entertainment for them. And so that we're super, super excited about. We have the Web Griffin, W.B. Griffin, as you know, passed away. He was writing a series called The Presidential Agent, in addition to the other 100 amazing series that he did. The man is an icon, obviously, in our business. And we were flattered to be asked to carry on that series. So it's not a reboot of the series, it's a continuation. He wrote 8 or 9 books, and then we pick up with the next book. Ours is book number 9, in fact, in that series. So Rogue Asset comes out December 7th from Putnam over at Penguin. Super excited to do that. Brian, you want to pick it up from there? I'm out of breath. We have too many books.
Yeah. Well, and like Rick said, the other one that's sort of been, we've sort of kept it under the radar, and I'm glad you asked about it, which is the Sandbox concept. And, this is one that Jeff and I have a lot of diverse interests. We write military characters. This has a former military CID investigator, a woman, and but she's now since become a homicide detective, and she is investigating the strangest homicide imaginable. And, what's happening, there's a lot of technological advances going on right now in the world. We're seeing them every day. I think today, Elon Musk and Tesla came out and said they're going to build a humanoid robot because they can and because people need them. And I mean, to think about that, this sounds like pie in the sky, but he's already made a self-driving car, so it's probably going to happen. So the rate of technology is changing, and that changes people's lives. So every time new technology sort of comes into the market, comes into our lives, it can have a nefarious effect. It can have a beneficial effect. Usually it has a little bit of both. And so, getting back to that what if question, we wanted to say, what if artificial intelligence, a nefarious artificial intelligence got empowered? What's the worst that could happen? So this is a little bit of a departure for us from military thrillers. We still have military characters, but has a techno component. It has a investigative component, a crime component. So we're really excited about it.
Well, yeah, I haven't read it. It's a heck of a book.
Oh, thank you so much. We are really excited about it because both of us have such a rich science background and interest. that writing this was almost a natural thing. And we talked about it for a little while, but I just love the idea. People have ever since time, we could imagine these things. We've been writing novels about them, right? All the way back to the 40s and the 50s. But our what if question is, what if an AI, what if an artificial intelligence went nuts? Where there's plenty of serial killer books out there, there are plenty of technology books over there. What if we dumped them all into one book, right? And so it's a really cool premise. What if an AI became sentient and had some serious psychiatric disorder? What would that look like? And man, it was really fun to write. We're super excited about this one.
Cool. And it's the first of what will be a series of books.
Right. Yes. So we're excited about that too. And we're so grateful to Blackstone for, believing in us and supporting us.
Of course. I mean, you deserve it. What else can I say? So do you have a routine? Do you spend a certain amount of each day writing during defined periods or whenever it feels like it? Or what's your routine? How do you write?
Because Blackstone believed in us, our routine now is we wake up and we write until we drop, and then we go to sleep because we have no choice. No, I'm just...
I'm laughing too, because Jeff and I have been talking about, we feel like our productivity rate has really gone up over the last year and a half, and we still need to get it higher. So, I use this submarine metaphor, what we try to do is we say, all right, we're going to go deep. So in the submarine community, you're at periscope depth, you get your message traffic, and then you put the periscope down, you go deep, and nobody bothers you down there. So that's what we try to do, is we say, we check our email, touch base, we go deep, and we ignore everything, and we write, and then we can come up to periscope depth a couple times a day to check our email, do the business stuff. But as everything takes off, as this platform grows, Rick, the demands of the business side are encroaching. There's a lot of demands. Social media is a lot of work, and merchandise and interviews and podcasts. We love all these things, but there's so many of them that it does require a lot of discipline for us to say, hey, we have to disconnect and write, or we're not going to get these books done.
Yeah. And I think we also maybe slightly underestimated the impact of developmental edits and line and copy edits of multiple books. And so at any given time, it's a pretty rare month that all we're doing is working on the next manuscript. There's some division of labor. So I think that's a perfect description. We try to block out at least half the day to get words on the page. We got to have a page count for both of us every day, but we can't ignore the other aspects of it. We got to do the interviews. We have to do the editing. We have to do, calls with the marketing team and that kind of stuff, which we enjoy, but it is a lot of work. So I don't know how you could do it if you didn't have all day, every day. I love my kids, but I'm really glad they're back at school.
I get it. Do either of you ever experience writer's block?
No, because, and this is the coolest part of our job in co-authoring. I had writer's block for about 30 seconds, and I texted Jeff and I was like, hey, I know you're writing, but it'd really help me if we could have a quick call. And about 10 minutes later, he's like, hey, I'm ready to take a break. Give me a shout. And I said, all right, I started down this path, and now I'm sort of at a fork. Like, we could either go this way or go that way. We laid it out, we brainstormed. He's like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And we're all, okay, great. Now I'm excited. He's excited. We hang up, and I'm back writing. So that's our solution for writer's block.
Yeah. Just have two people.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had done an interview with Catherine Coulter, which I'm going to be posting later today. And I asked her about writer's block, and Catherine's answer was, there is no such thing as writer's block. All it means is you've written a crappy story. It just won't go anywhere.
Well, she probably could do it. She's written a lot, so she knows.
And who doesn't? If anyone that's ever met Kathy loves her, and that's why. She's just
fabulous.
That is the perfect Coulter story right there. That's exactly right.
Oh, absolutely. So, Brian, I want to ask you a question about what Career Authors is, because I think it's kind of germane to this, what we're doing here today.
Yeah, no, Career Authors is something that sort of I meandered into. It's a group of a few writers, an editor, So Dana Isaacson, who I think you know, he does some, he's a great development editor, and he does some freelance for Blackstone. He used to work at Random House, so he's very experienced.
Right.
Hank Philippi Ryan, who is an amazing author, and Paul Munier, who is an author and also an agent. She works with Gina, our agent, at Talcott Notch. So it's just a group of folks who sort of came together and said, hey, let's try to take that model of giving back to the writing community. So we each, I'm sorry, Jessica Strasser also is a member too. She's one of our newest members, and she used to be at Writer's Digest. She's also a full-time author now, and brilliant and extremely talented. So sort of this idea of, okay, let's take our experience and let's give back to the writing community. So it's all free. It's blog based, really. Every week, one of us interviews an author, typically in the industry, and then we'll post our own, article about craft or publishing or marketing or social media. And it's just sharing lessons learned and things that we've learned to help other aspiring authors, write better books and get their books sold into market.
So where do people go to be able to access that?
careerauthors.com.
That works. That works. So I think we're kind of running close to being out of time. And I was wondering if either of you or both of you could share what you do think are some good tips for authors that we haven't covered yet.
I mean, it's going to sound trite, but I think it's important that it be said. A writer writes. And so the two big things that I offer to new writers is, one, you have to schedule writing like it's a job. And I know for all of us, it doesn't start out as a job, because you have a job and you're putting bread on the table, and you're taking care of your kids, and it's easy to let a week go by and you haven't done anything. It's very difficult to produce decent content that way. And so what I always tell people is, instead of trying to have an 8-hour Saturday where you write, writing 8 hours, if you have ever done it, is a rare thing. Like that's a long time. A few hours is really all any of us professional writers can do and be good. So instead, try to find a few days a week, early in the morning, right after work, whatever, when your mind is fresh, and just give yourself 90 minutes, a couple days a week. If you can do that, and you can put 5 pages down, 1,000, 2,000 words, a couple days a week, that actually becomes a novel in a pretty short period of time. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is related to that, which is the writers that take 15 years to write their novel do so not because they have writer's block, not because they don't have a good idea, but because they try to make every word and every sentence and every page perfect. And that's not what a professional writer does. A professional writer gets his story done, and it doesn't really become that great novel until editing. The editing is where the story really becomes amazing. And so if you're shackling yourself by trying to edit as you go, you're never going to get it done. Take your story, get it out, get it done, set it down for a few weeks, read it, fix it, and then move on.
I agree, 100%. Brian?
Mine's gonna echo Jeff's, and I don't want to be unoriginal, but for me, it is the thing that changed my career, because I was that guy who spent 7 to 8 years, and I was that guy who tried to make every sentence perfect. And when I first started writing with Jeff, he's churning out content, and I'm like, yeah, I did 3 pages today, but they're good 3 pages. He's like, let's try to get going a little faster. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so, I embraced this. I heard it at Thriller Fest. I don't remember who said it, but the quote was, all writing is rewriting. And when that hit, it was really epiphany for me. For me, the epiphany was, okay, I can rewrite anything just because it's on the page doesn't mean it's not been forged from iron, I have a computer, I just erase it, or I write over it, or whatever. And so that actually is quite liberating, because like Jeff said, you get this story down on the page, and then you have something to work with. You've got nothing to work with when there's nothing on the page. So get it on the page, you have something to work with, and then you can go to a place like Career Authors and you can say, all right, how do I make my villain more villainy? How do I make my hero more heroic? How do I incorporate, the hero's journey into the story? How do I increase the suspense? What is subtext? How do I put that in there? You can't do any of that stuff unless you have something on the page. There has to be a framework. So look at every pass as just an opportunity to make the story more suspenseful, more emotional, more engaging. That's the way I look at it now.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I read something online where somebody said, nobody is going to read your book as many times as you, the author, is.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
And that's true. I mean, even with Scorpion, it started as a couple of short stories, and then it went through revisions. And then I've reread this book and rejiggered it, if you will, probably 20 times or more. And each time it gets better, until you finally, like you said, gets to developmental editing, and then it becomes the cherry on the sundae, if you will.
Exactly.
Well, cool. I in my career in the music industry, I worked with, not as a musician, but on the business side with a couple of really important duos, Hall & Oates and Brooks and Dunn. And I like to think of you guys as my Brooks and Dunn and Hall & Oates of the publishing world. I'm serious. I mean, the interesting thing about all four of those musical people was they were each incredible on their own, but together they transcended their individual abilities. And I think you guys, I've looked at some of your early solo books. I think you're great writers, but I just love what you're doing together.
Thank you. Maybe we're the proof of that. The whole is better than the sum of its parts, sort of thing, right?
Or as I like to say it, in the case of Brian Andrews and Jeff Wilson, you take two of us and we're almost one good writer.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end this. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely enjoyable for me. I hope it's been enjoyable for you, and I think people will learn a lot.
We had a great time.
Absolutely. Anytime, Rick.
Well, good. Well, thank you. Okay.